Thank you very much, Phil. Yes, welcome to our final session this afternoon. Hopefully we'll keep things entertaining for you. There is a fair bit of paperwork floating around. You don't need to worry about any of that until later though. I know the temptation to sit and read, we try not to be that boring, but it's always there. So what we're going to do now is a very brief introduction to ourselves as funders. We're not the only funders, far from it, but a little bit of information about who we are, the kind of funding opportunities we have. We're going to gloss over, we've got a nice few slides here of differences between our funding and some of the practical criteria for you to consider. You don't need to read any of that now, that will just be in the slides that get sent out to you. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about, from our shared experiences, some of the common pitfalls and some of the things that really are the core questions that you should be asking yourself. And that we will be asking of you around your funding bids. And then what we're going to do for the second half of the session is you are going to be the funders for the rest of the afternoon. So we'll fund that. So, I drew the shortest straw, so I get to go first. Arts Council England. Stick your hand up if you've heard of Arts Council England. Hooray! Good. That's good, because that wasn't everybody, which means I am in the right space. So Arts Council England is the National Development Agency for Creativity and Culture, and we are an investor of money from the government through Treasury, but also a distributor of national lottery funding. And our mission is to support creativity and culture across England so that everyone, wherever they live, can lead a happy, healthy and creative life. We offer funding to organisations, to consortia, partnership groups, but also to individuals. So there are many opportunities and avenues for funding from Arts Council. You don't have to be an organisation with a bank account. You don't have to be of a certain size or scale. Anybody with a bank account in England can in fact be a recipient of our funding as long as they're over 18. We have a strategy called Let's Create, and that is our current strategy, and that will run through till 2030, 2031. We launched it in 2020, everybody was a bit busy, so we rolled that back a bit. Then we relaunched it in 2021, and so now it starts, now's the 10 years. So our vision is that by 2030, we want England to be a country in which the creativity of each of us is valued and given the chance to flourish, and where every one of us has access to a remarkable range of high-quality cultural experiences. So as I say, we fund individuals, we fund organisations, and we fund anybody who is delivering work which will benefit people in England. So we are specifically Arts Council England, and we have sister organisations in the other home nations. We support 8 disciplines. They are music, theatre, dance, museums, libraries, visual arts, literature and combined arts. Those of you that know what combined arts is know that that isn't just mashing any of the other two together, it is actually its own thing, I promise. And combined arts also includes all of our support for festival work as well. And we know that you work in lots of different ways, in lots of different settings. Some of those academic, some of those are community-based, some of those are third sector voluntary charities, some of you local authorities. We fund a real kind of smorgasbord of organisations and people right across this way. As long as your work has clear, creative, artistic outputs or a clear focus on one of our artistic disciplines, we can support you. We try not to be overly prescriptive. We try not to be overly kind of structured and restricted on what counts as art. We don't get into those conversations, that's not our place. But we want to provide funding for you if you are doing creative and cultural things. So we have a variety of different funding models, but one of the things that I'm going to draw your attention to now, and I'm very happy to talk to people about at length later, is our most common source of funding, which is our National Lottery Project Grants. So National Lottery Project Grants is lottery funding, it is open access, it is open all year round, and it is funding for basically any of those art forms that we've already seen. And it covers a huge range of work, anything from individual creative practice, so encouraging and supporting the development of creative practice in schools with young people, for example, all the way through to community commissioning of art, to community creation and co-creation of art, creative health, organisational development if you are working in the arts sector, So if you are an organisation that's an arts and community charity or a museum service or a library, we can offer funding for your organisational development, but also more sector-facing work as well. So if you are looking at developing best practice in the sector, if you're looking at developing international relationships, if you're looking at new models, new ways of working, of new concepts around kind of ownership and democratisation of culture, all of those things are possible projects that we can fund. The other thing I want to draw attention to before I hand over is we currently have a form of National Lottery project grants called Unlocking Collections, which I thought was particularly of interest today because that is aimed at heritage organisations and museum services in particular. So museums, archives, people with collections. Unlocking Collections is a time-limited priority, which means that this exists as something which gives extra weighting to any bids that come in until March 2025. And the focus of it is about enabling museums to develop their collections-based work and increasing the public engagement with and use of collections. So that can include some collections care and conservation to a limited extent, it can include some capital, but really it's about if you have collections, if you have heritage stories that you want to tap into and focus on and share more widely, this is funding for you. I'm around until the end of the day, very happy to talk to you about any of that. But I'm now going to hand over to Rachel.
Hi everybody, I'm Rachel McFarlane and I'm the Senior Engagement Manager for the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So like Arts Council, we have an even newer strategy actually, which was launched in 2033, which is called Heritage, no, it was launched in 2023 and it's Heritage 2033. It's our first 10-year vision, which we've had in previously 5 years. And we are the largest UK funder of heritage. We consider heritage to be anything from our past that we value and we want to pass on to future generations. So there's some examples on here, but it's incredibly broad, the types of things that we are able to fund and support as a funder. We have an open programme, and that's at 2 different levels of grant. The table that we're going to share later, the slides, will explain the eligibility and the criteria for those in a bit more detail. But basically, there is a £10,000 to £250,000 grant level, and then there is an over £250,000 up to £10 million grant level. We ask all projects to demonstrate how they take into account our 4 investment principles. So if you're familiar with what is often referred to as HLF funding, but now National Lottery Heritage funding and heritage grants, we now have 4 investment principles rather than the 9 outcomes that we previously had. And these 4 investment principles are saving heritage, protecting the environment, access, participation and inclusion, and organisational sustainability. But depending on what the nature of the project is, the focus on those will be in different areas and they can apply to all of these types of heritage. And the best thing to do is to speak to myself or Becky, my colleague, if you have an idea, because we have an engagement team that provide advice up until the point when you put in an application. So if you've got an idea, it makes sense to speak to us sooner rather than later. But I will cover who can apply. So we fund not-for-profit organisations, including these different types of constitution, but we also now fund private owners of physical heritage up to £250,000, where public benefit outweighs any private gain, and we can also fund partnerships. So there's a wide range there of flexibility, and as I say, they're both open programmes. So you can apply at any time, but for the large grants, it's a little bit more complicated. There's a 2-stage process, and the decisions go to committee. So again, we'd advise having a chat to us if that's the level of grant you're looking for. So that's me, I'll pass it to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Amelia Sando, I'm the Investment Manager for the Heritage, Culture and Creative Arts team at the Arts Factors Research Council. So I assume most of you are familiar with the HRC, but if you are not, I'd firstly like to provide some context for those unaware, so UKRI is a national funding agency which works with government to fund around £7 billion a year in research and innovation through collaborations with both academia and industry. As part of UKRI, HLC allocates around £110 million each year to support the arts and humanities, including through heritage investments. For instance, the GLAM pilot hubs have explored how independent research organisations can support community-led research. The £18.9 million towards a national collection programme has sought to unlock the potential for a national digital infrastructure for collections. Additionally, last year we launched an exhibitions fund to encourage innovative approaches to exhibition development. And these are just a few examples of targeted funding within the heritage and GLAM sector. Regarding HLC eligibility, we adhere to standard UKRI eligibility rules, which means that only universities and certain independent and public sector research organisations are eligible to lead HLC grants, while other organisations can participate as collaborators or partners. If your institution is ineligible to hold UKRI grants, HLC are continually exploring new ways of involving smaller or non-research intensive organisations into our funding. One example is our recently launched community-led heritage research and skills hub, which is a bit of a mouthful, for which we're in the process of selecting a grant recipient. This programme will support research within smaller and regional organisations through a devolved funding model, meaning we fund an eligible research organisation who then distributes this funding through a spoke model. So in terms of how we might define and manage our heritage portfolio, we continue to build upon our past investments and expand our commitment to heritage research through partnerships with other agencies, targeted funding opportunities and collaborations both within the UK and internationally. This approach includes co-funded programmes with DCMS, such as the development of a taxonomy for value of cultural and heritage assets, and more recently efforts to translate cultural heritage research into climate change policy. Additionally, the HLC has co-funded 5 opportunities through the Joint Programming Initiative for Cultural Heritage, supporting 38 transnational projects aimed at preserving cultural heritage in all its forms. In respect to our broader strategy, we take a holistic view of heritage, which encompasses the tangible, intangible, digital, intellectual, and artistic functions, as well as the connections between them. Additionally, a key principle of this strategy is to remain dynamic and to adapt to emerging trends and consultations, thereby supporting the skills and facilities required for an innovative and impactful heritage portfolio. So, for my final slide, I want to highlight the available funding streams with a focus on responsive modes. We do not currently have any open thematic pools targeting heritage. So this offering has recently been restructured to better support emerging talents, create opportunities for larger projects, and expand the range of researchers who can benefit from our funding. So to provide you some more detail, I'll refer you to the slightly scary table on the screen. At the top you'll see the Curiosity Awards. So Curiosity supports larger awards compared to its predecessor, Research Networking, and its intention is to fund curiosity-driven research, networking activity and idea generation, enabling the development of further research agendas and opportunities. For instance, we hope to support projects that innovate models of knowledge exchange and are bold in their desires to engage with the public. Furthermore, we want to avoid funding what others are better positioned to support, and instead offer something that will speak to the new and the genuinely novel. It's therefore important that within the scheme we empower assessors to evaluate the potential for impact and therefore endorse bold and novel ideas. Beneath Curiosity we have the Catalyst Awards on the left. So these support researchers without prior experience of leading a significant research project. So this is effectively our early career provision. And the aim is to kind of accelerate the trajectories of independent researchers. We identified this after identifying a critical gap in our existing provision for early career researchers. In this, we've taken a completely different approach to defining eligibility, moving away from early career definitions based on a number of years post-PhD. Instead, moving to a model of self-identification which is aligned with your grant holding history. This broadens the definition of what it means to be an early career researcher and opens the scheme up to other researchers who may have been disadvantaged in our previous responsive mode structure. Equally adjacent to this is that the scheme enables both solo and team-orientated approaches. Again, this award is as much about supporting people as it is a catalyst for new ideas. And then next to Catalyst, we have the research grants. So this is our standard research grant scheme, and it is intended to support collaborative research projects which require leadership from more than one scholar. These grants require one lead and at least one co-lead, whether based in the UK or internationally, so it's basically a team project. And to accommodate more ambitious and advanced projects within the scheme, we've increased the upper funding limit from £1 million to £1.5 million, as well as to address rising research costs. And then finally at the bottom here, we do have the following funding, which supports unforeseen knowledge exchange, active dissemination and commercialisation activities that arise during or after an HLC funded project. However, as part of our responsive mode transition, we have temporarily paused the scheme to allow for a more comprehensive review. It's currently yet to be determined how this will be restructured. There is actually one additional funding stream which isn't on this slide, and that's the Mission Awards pilot. So these are our largest awards. They range between £2 and £3 million. They can last up to 4 years in duration. They're not currently part of our current grant provision as they are still a pilot. However, these will support large-scale projects that can advance arts humanities research agendas and transform approaches to research leadership. Notably, these are the first responsive mode grants to fund team-based applications where the title of project lead does not denote seniority, as with a traditional grant. While these are no longer open for applications, I just wanted to quickly acknowledge that pilot because it's a unique approach to collaboration and the size of the awards are unique for HLC. That's everything for me. Are we covering that?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. So as we said earlier, we have got some slides that are effectively a breakdown of our current funding opportunities and so on. As I say, we're not going to dwell on these because you will get these in your pack, and spreadsheets are not fun for anybody. Actually, that's a lie. Spreadsheets are very fun for some people. Thank God that they exist. So, for the next few minutes, and we're sort of just going to be looking at this for sort of 5 or 10, I think. What we thought would be useful was, even though the three funders of you heard, there are some areas of overlap, there are some areas where we're quite distinct and different. I think we all came to the agreement that there are some issues that we all experience and that we all see in applications to our funds. Everybody's guilty of these. We're not going to shame anybody. I'm not going to point at the delegates and go, you did this. There are no examples, I promise. We're far too professional for that. But these really are the 6 most common issues. And I thought what we might do is, if either of you had any particular examples or particular things you thought that you wanted to draw attention to, I'll kick us off with eligibility. And I know that this is one that we all discussed, something that we see. Eligibility is a common issue. Now, it's the very first thing that gets looked at. Whichever funder you go to, I can guarantee you, the first thing that will be checked is, are you actually eligible for the money you're asking for? Are you actually eligible for the scheme you're asking for? My first piece of advice is, check that you are eligible for the funding you are applying for, because otherwise you will waste a lot of your time and a little bit of ours. So please do check your eligibility.
So on eligibility, obviously this is quite a major concern within AHLC because it wasn't apparent from the presentation. I think we've got quite strict eligibility criteria. So naturally I think definitely in terms of both your contractual eligibility, so for instance with our organisation it is required that you either have a contract of employment at the point of submission or the point where you're commencing the project. And equally, we are a bit more restrictive in terms of what organisations can apply. You can't just log on to TFS, which is our funding system, just write an application and submit it. There is an entire process attached to becoming recognised as eligible. You have to go through funding assurance, you have to nominate a council for validation. So just be aware of that. And make sure you kind of have that in place if you are considering submitting an application.
We quite often find, and I don't know if you find this as well, Rachel, with capital funding, a lot of people apply for funding to do capital works to buildings they don't actually own or have permission to do any building work on. So that's a good one. I don't know if you have any.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say, John. I think if you've ever got any questions, it can get more complex from a legal point of view with kind of ownership when it comes to buildings, and also like partnerships, who's best placed to lead on a project, and there's all sorts of considerations around that.
I would just say, if you're not sure, ask, don't go to all the effort of filling in an application for it then to fall down because of eligibility.
Absolutely. So actually, let's hop across on that note of project teams and partners and partnerships. Who is doing the project? So one of the things that we will be looking at, that we all look at when we're assessing, is who is the project team? You know, who has applied for the funding? Who is in place as partners? And effectively, the question, I think, in the bluntest sense, certainly for us at Arts Council, is why you? And it's not necessarily the nicest question to be confronted with, but it is a very honest one. Why you? There are lots and lots and lots of organisations, and we would love to fund all of them. There are lots of people we'd love to fund all of them, but we do not have the money. So why you? And who is coming with you on this project? Who is driving the, and we'll talk about need and demand, but who is driving this? Who are your partners, and what is the nature of that partnership? I don't know if there's anything you want to speak on particularly around that topic.
I think it's still on, isn't it? Yeah. So this is equally a concern for AHLC applications, I think. One thing to be aware of is that we're now on a new funding system. Previously we used to accept applications via chairs. On the new funding system, we have a section called applicant and capability to deliver. And so what this means is that we're no longer requesting CVs. We ask you to do the kind of R4RI structure. So basically we're focusing less on sort of impact metrics and more the kind of less tangible knowledge and experience. I think that's equally important. And I think you should make apparent in your applications how you're kind of monopolising on the expertise of your team, especially if it is kind of a more interdisciplinary application. We need to be assured that the necessary expertise is present. Do you have anything to add?
I think I was just going to really echo what John said and say that with applications to our funding, we do, confusingly in some respects, talk about partners and then partnership agreements. So there's a difference between people that are going to take part in your project as partner organisations that might enable you to reach a particular group of people, for instance, and that's very much collaborating with another organisation. It's slightly different if there's going to be some kind of sharing of the funding that you're receiving, and then there needs to be kind of a contractual signing up to our terms and conditions. So if you're under any confusion again, just ask, but it's another one where funders use the word partners to mean two things. There's an informal nature of partnership, but then it's something different where we're talking about leases and ownership of buildings and stuff. So again, if you're not sure, just ask.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great point. And on the subject of things with a double meaning, time. Putting in an application takes time. Writing the application takes time. I can see a lot of people nodding at that one, yeah. Refining the application takes time. And depending on the funding stream you apply for, there may either be fixed deadlines or it might be a rolling programme with a certain lead-in time for a decision to be made. So, for example, some of our funding has an 8-week decision-making process, some has longer. That's one step, is do you actually have the time, if you know when you want to deliver your project, and this is something we see a lot, people are really ambitious about, we're going to get this funding in 8 weeks, and we start in 8 weeks in 1 day. And I applaud your optimism, and if you can do that, that's amazing, and I'd like to find out how, because that is just simply not necessarily practical. The other thing is thinking about the length of time your project will run for. So some of our funding is opportunities that are across multiple years, some of it is for shorter opportunities. We need to make sure that you've considered the amount of time and the time investment of your team, of your volunteers, of your participants, and that all adds up and makes sense. Do you have enough time built into your project to achieve your project outcomes? Or are you seeking something that is massive and over-ambitious and actually is realistically 2 or 3 separate projects? That in a very competitive environment, we might fund a short project, and then once you've got the evidence of its success, and we'll come on to evaluation in a second, you can come back for more money. Might be different with different funders. It's the kind of thing you need to think about in all seriousness now, is time. Again, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add on that?
I would definitely agree that feasibility tends to be the greatest pitfall at assessment. So if you've not appropriately costed either your staff time or for any sort of deliverables. Equally, if there's not sufficient time to actually execute the project, realistically you wouldn't be competitive, and I think it can be quite challenging when you are preparing an application for an opportunity which is framed as funding ambitious, kind of risky research, but I think equally it's important to mitigate any of those kind of intellectual or practical risks and make that really evident in your project. I think you shouldn't be distracted by kind of low fund amounts. So, for instance, with Curiosity, that's capped at £100,000. So often we see staff time has not been kind of appropriately costed, for the duration. So I think, everything needs to be in scale and should be proportional to what you want to deliver. I think that's everything for me. Do you have anything to add? Or? No.
Cool. Well, on that note, we will move on in time. And actually, you just briefly touched on money as well, which is a really important thing. Who'd have thought that when you talk to the funders, the amount of money matters? And again, there's a number of, it's quite fun, but there are a number of aspects to this. The first one is fundamentally, do check your budgets, add up, please. I implore you, please do just check that your numbers make sense and that they add up right. And that if there are match funding requirements, going back to eligibility, that you've met those, or that you've got the funding strategy in place. There's nothing more frustrating than seeing a brilliant project that looks like it's going to have amazing outcomes, that's really well considered for timings, and then we look at the numbers and go, but actually these two spreadsheets say different things. And for that reason, we have to bounce it back to you, and it's going to take another 8 weeks to get a funding decision. Or you've missed this round of funding, or it's been unsuccessful. So it's just a quick plea, I think, from all of us. Please do check your sums and maybe get somebody else to check them as well, even if you're mathematically inclined, please. And again, making sure that the level of money is appropriate to, exactly as you were saying, making sure that the amount we're asking for is actually appropriate to achieving your objectives. The next thing, rolling on, is demonstrating a need and demonstrating basically a demand, and this is particularly something that I know that Rachel and I have both talked about quite passionately, is with the focus of our funds on making a difference in people's lives, of engaging with communities, of celebrating people's stories, is something that we want to make sure is that it's not you coming as an artist or a museum or an organisation saying, we have this idea and we're going to do it on that community group, or to that community group, or for that community group. We want to hear, this community group is really excited in these ideas, and they've shared that they think the museum should do this, or they feel like this would be a brilliant artistic intervention, or these partners are crying out to work with an organisation such as ourselves. We want to see and feel that demand in applications, because at the end of the day, certainly as lottery distributors, we are distributing money for the good of people and for the impact on their lives, and we want to know that it's what they want as well, and that it's not something that's being imposed and inflicted. Again, I don't know if you have anything to add on that one?
I would just say that I think considering added value as well, so what would a grant with this specific opportunity add to the project? Could it otherwise still be deliverable? I think that needs to be apparent. Equally, I think you have to be conscious that obviously this is taxpayers' money, and that is something assessors will be sort of cognizant of when they're evaluating your applications. Is does this represent a good use of taxpayers' money as well? And in that respect, I think projects that can demonstrate timeliness tend to be more competitive. I think that's everything.
And then the last one of the common issues that we wanted to sort of very briefly touch on now is evaluation. And it's something that we've heard time and again today. Actually, we've been hearing about some amazing creative evaluation. We've heard about different models and methodologies of evaluation. We've heard about the requirement for the health sector for having good evidenceable data that's potentially clinical quality or value, and how do we meet these needs? Your evaluation needs to be appropriate to the scale and scope of the funding of the project. We don't expect you to spend half your budget on evaluating whether the project works or not, but we want to see clearly how you're going to move forward after this project, what you're going to take from this project. Is the project iterative in nature? Are you developing and learning it and growing it as it goes? Are you responding to feedback from the participants? What are your evaluation methodologies? And it doesn't have to be, certainly not for Arts Council funding, it doesn't have to be sort of in technical, heavy, kind of evaluative language, but we need to understand practically what are you going to do? Are you going to check in with people? When are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? Who are you asking these questions of? If you're looking for more money, we ask for a framework that tells us what kind of questions you're asking. We really want to know that you have thought about evaluation. How will you know when your project has succeeded, and how will you know what success looks like? It's two kind of pretty core integral questions for us, certainly. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, just make sure you include evaluation for any application. We do ask for that, and also, I mean, we've touched on money as well, but the other thing that there's either not enough of or it's not there is contingency. Every project needs to have that contingency built in as well. Sorry, just tagging that one.
Yeah, definitely. Great point. Okay, so that was a whistle-stop tour through some please don't do these things or please do think about these things as a plea from us as funders. We're going to talk a little bit about decision-making. Now, each of us has different decision-making processes. We've got different decision-making bodies. And depending on the kind of funding you're looking at, the model of that decision-making will be slightly different. But I would like to introduce you all to the Harnessing Heritage Fund. So the Harnessing Heritage Fund is a fund for projects which use local heritage assets to develop and strengthen a local sense of pride and identity, foster individual well-being and social cohesion, enhance and sustain local economic prosperity. Now, if that sounds familiar, that's because that's the focus of this conference, so hopefully that does sound familiar. In fact, I think it's pretty much lifted verbatim from what you wrote, Phil. Projects that are applied to the Harnessing Heritage Fund must have a clear start and an end date, they must have evidenceable outputs and 10% match funding. And you can apply to this fund via an online form. Only you can't because it doesn't exist, sorry. So that is the fund that we're going to be looking at today. And when people apply to this fund, they are asked the following prompts. How will your project meet the aims of the fund? How will you manage and deliver your project? And how will you know if your project is successful? So going back to what we were just talking about, we've got questions about feasibility, practicality, we've got questions about evaluation, and we've got questions about what is the purpose, what is the need, what is the demand. And that's what people have been asked. You, today, get to be the decision makers for this fund. Lucky you, your pack has just come in, so that you are sitting on a panel with people around you. And you've got 4 applications in your pack. You've got 45 grand to spend. But the pack is worth £81,000. Yeah, we want to know what you want to fund. So, working with your neighbours, working in small groups with people you find yourself sitting with, we'd like for you to read the 4 applications, and then for each of the 4 applications, have a think about these 4 questions. Does it meet the aims of the fund? And we'll be able to go back to those if you need them. Is it likely to be well managed and delivered? Is there likely to be an appropriate evaluation? And would I prefer to fund this application? We're going to give you, I think, 10 to 15 minutes, we'll play it by ear. We're going to find out from you as an entire room which of the applications you have access to you would like to fund. So do have a read of them. If you don't have all of them, there are more copies down at the front. Please do collaborate with the people around you. Have a read, have a chat, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes. Before we kick off with this, just a couple of things to say. One is that we've been committed by Phil to go slightly over time because everybody was very eager with their teas and coffees, so we started slightly late. But also, if you want to have conversations with us and you do have to run off to get training or anything, all of our contact details are at the end of the presentation, which will be distributed. They're all in the pack. Please do just drop us an email. Also, these slides will contain a whole load of useful links for you, so when the slides come out, you can just follow those to our website, which has got a lot of guidance on. However, back to the matter at hand. So, first of all, let's just go through them in number. I think what we'll do is we'll just start with a quick simple show of hands. So, application number 1. Who would like to fund application? Who preferred to fund application number 1?
Which one is it?
So, number 1.
Brayshaw Museum.
Proposal 1, the Brayshaw Museum with whimsy words. No? Wow, okay, that's pretty definitive. Nobody's going to that one.
Just that we give them less money.
Interesting. Oh, somebody's breaking the rules and giving reduced offers. Do you want to, yeah. A couple of, who wants to say a couple of words about number 1? Why do you want to? Great point. Good point. Anybody else want to share any thoughts on number 1, on the Brayshaw Museum?
Yeah, there seems to be some kind of confusion in the partnership with Whimsy Words. They weren't making the application, but they would clearly be given some of the money. So I think that's an instance where they haven't formalised the partnership.
Yeah, really interesting point, because the Whimsy Words are clearly getting a significant portion of the money from this, but they're not the lead applicant. Really good point. So we had a thought about some of the pros and cons of the first one. They're experienced practitioners. There is evidence in this application that they've got experience delivering this kind of programme. That's good. There is some training in there for the museum staff, which could, if it's good training, have some good legacy for the project. And in terms of who they were using as their promotional partners, that was pretty good. They'd thought about it. They'd gone above and beyond kind of just their own social media networks. They've given that some thought. We picked up on some other cons. There are definitely more of them. But the role of the mental health practitioner doesn't actually say what that person's going to be doing, or why they're there, or how they're going to be helpful. Now, we think it's really useful and really good in principle, but what's the function? What's their purpose? A lot of the match funding, by the sounds of it, comes from ticketed gigs to 4 poetry nights that are the same poets each time, a week apart. That doesn't strike me as the most secure form of match funding. So there were some questions around that. The level of commitment required from the participants, it was quite intense. There were 2 workshops every week over the length of the project, which is brilliant if you've got buy-in from a really committed group that you've got a deep embedded relationship with. Less good if you're just recruiting these people and it's the first project they've worked on. And the actual participant output was limited. The participants weren't performing. The participants were putting their poems kind of up on the board outside the gig, which we thought was a real shame, a bit of a disappointing outcome for the participants. So, how about proposal number 2, which was Springland Libraries with a group of independent museums. Who wanted to fund this one? Oh, seeing a few more hands. Oh, seeing a lot of hands. Does anybody want to go to bat for this one? Any thoughts that you want to share? We have our roving mic. Anybody feeling brave? No? Oh, yeah, we've got somebody. Excellent. Go for it.
Yay! Right. Sorry, too many guesses. So I thought they showed the workshop had an artistic director who has 10 years of experience. They were talking about expertise in there. They were talking about the funding in cash, in kind offering. So there's a kind of logic and there was clearly some kind of reasoning as to how they would sustain this project. They also talked about evaluation quite a lot. So what we could deliver at the end. How is that going to engage the community? How is that going to engage the participants, the refugees, asylum seekers in future? And also improving language skills longer term. So I thought they were good benefits.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. And yeah, there seems to be quite a lot of overwhelming support in the room. Some of you might disagree, but there was a lot of hands up. So again, just quickly, some pros that we'd identified. Again, these aren't the only ones, but there was clear targets, there was clear outputs. We knew who you wanted to work with, we knew what you wanted to do. Brilliant. The strengthened library and museum partnership for long term, we thought was really going to meet the aims of the fund. It was a really exciting thing to see. And as has been pointed out, the experienced practitioners with relevant experience was really clearly labelled. It's not to say it's perfect. There are some cons, some concerns, and some maybe some issues. It's quite a complex project to manage, multiple venues, multiple different groups, lots and lots of people with potentially quite significant access needs or support, lots of bits to juggle. Not a problem if you're experienced project managers, we're happy to take on that risk, but there is a potential risk there. There's quite a short turnaround for creating the digital content for exhibitions. Those of you that maybe have exhibition experience might have looked at that timeline and gone, God, that's tight. And yeah, there are potentially questions about the quality of the output because of that. And there's quite limited info about how the exhibited work will be displayed, how long it will be presented for, what it will look like at the different museums. But in principle, quite an exciting sounding project, and it looks like the room wants to fund it. So, I'm going to speed up for 3. I suspect there's probably not going to be any hands. So I'm going to give our position on 3, and then if anybody wants to come and defend it, they're very welcome to. So this is Berkeley Museum Sketch. A drawing class for adults with differences. Well, we liked that there was a clear output, that there was going to be an exhibition of the participants' work. That was very clear. We knew what the output from this was going to be. Sadly, that was about the only good thing we could find in this one. You might be more charitable, you might disagree. Fundamentally, though, we felt that this was quite underdeveloped. That there was quite limited information. It wasn't clear how it would meet the needs funds. It wouldn't meet our aims. There was a limited strategy to attract participants. I think it's a reference to our assistant who knows how to use Facebook. He's going to put it on Facebook. Not the greatest marketing strategy we've seen for us. And there was no evidence of demand. So going back to what we were saying about who wants your project, who needs your project, why. It sounds like a lovely idea presented by an art teacher who wanted to do some drawing classes. There was no evidence that the group wanted this, that the audience were interested. Does anybody want to go to bat for this one? Am I being overly mean? Anybody want to share anything? No, I'm not seeing any hands. Cool, moving on to... And that's how quickly some decisions get made, I'm afraid. Moving on to proposal number 4. So this was North Denton Museum, the Aspire project. Did anybody want to fund this one? Anybody have any thoughts? Well, a few people, a few more people, some people being swayed. Does somebody who doesn't want to fund this want to put their head above the parapet and share some things they didn't like about it? Yeah, absolutely.
Hello. I thought it was wildly overambitious for the amount of money, and 18 months of funding, 25 grand would go very far. So I just thought they were trying to do a lot. It sounds like about 5 different projects to me.
Yeah, so if anybody didn't hear that, wildly overambitious, sounds like 5 different projects. 25 grand isn't going to go very far in 18 months.
But there's the partners are offering 12, 10 and 5,000 as well on top.
So would you mind saying that again into the mic? That's all right.
The partners are offering 5,000, 10,000 and 12,000 pounds as well.
Yes,
So it's a lot more than 25,000 now.
So there is about another 27 grand of match funding to this project, which means the overall project is about 52,000. Which might change your mind. You might still think that's wildly ambitious. You might think that's God, I didn't do anything with that amount of money. Does anybody else who is either has a strong opinion for or against this project want to say something? It's quite interesting. This one's split the room a bit more. Yeah, we've got another one down here.
Well, so I just think that this is about the boatyards that are closing. This is people that are living in an area where they're looking for work and they're doing projects on their industrial heritage not existing. There's a bit of it that feels a bit less forward-thinking. Do you know what I mean?
It's quite ironic for a project called Aspire that it's about looking at all this stuff that's not here anymore. Yes, I could get into a long rant about memory-based projects, but I won't. Instead, yeah, we've seen some interesting pros and cons, and it was quite interesting how divided the room was. It does clearly, in some ways, meet the aims of our project, but on the flip side, this is a very complex project that actually seems to be 3 or 4 different projects. As you said, there's a work skills project here, there's the exhibition here, there's a social kind of history collection here. Now you might say, oh, that's really ambitious, really untenable, not practical. Or you might say, that's really ambitious, look at how they're integrating these different programs and it's all interlinked and folded, and that's a really good thing. And that's one of the things we wanted to do with this last one, and part of the reason that I saved it for number 4 is that, yeah, I don't know whether I would fund this project or not from what they've written. I can see some really great strengths, and I can also see some potential ways of interpreting those things as really big flaws. And it was quite interesting that one split the room nearly 50-50. Yeah, we've got...
Might you give feedback to them to say, could you rework this? Because you said earlier on about perhaps breaking it down into stages.
Yeah,
so that they identify a starting point and what the outcome of that would be, and how that then links to the next stage. So
yeah.
they've got a clearer trajectory.
So this is probably a really good kind of final point to end on, which is just to say that as funders, certainly at Arts Council, our funding opportunities are open year-round, and we do try and give feedback on unsuccessful applications. We have certainly over the last year or so moved to a model where we try to give you much more feedback. So it used to be you get a line of Arts Council English that wasn't terribly helpful. Now you get 2 or 3 bullet points or sentences saying, it could be strengthened by this. Have you thought about this partnership? Have you ever considered this? Could you demonstrate this? Which hopefully is a much clearer steer on how to reapproach a funder. It's very rare that we say, you were unsuccessful, don't go darken our doors again. I will say that's what my colleagues say, but do you want to share, in terms of kind of feedback for unsuccessful applications, do you want to just say a couple of words about what that's like for your funding streams?
Sure, yeah, you do get feedback on unsuccessful applications. It can be a bit limited. There's nothing stopping you then getting in touch with us to discuss how you move forwards with a future application. What I would say is it's much easier and less labour intensive for you to put in a project inquiry or have a conversation with us in advance and to us give you some advice at that stage. And those projects do tend to be more likely to be successful further down the line than throwing in an application, hopefully, and then having to go through all of that. So, yeah, it's perhaps not, it's limited because of resource and how much feedback we can give, but yeah, we do try where we can.
Yeah, it's definitely the same for AHRC, and it is partly dependent on which funding stream you apply for. So with Curiosity, for instance, the turnaround for grants is less than 6 months. So we're able to provide quicker outcomes, but as a result we can't provide individual feedback. But then with research grants and Catalyst, you will receive 3 expert reviews as part of the assessment process. So that's what we would consider fulfilling that feedback requirement. So it does depend on the scheme, but generally with opportunities that have a larger fund amount, we do try and provide feedback where possible.
So the general advice, as always, is ask first, have a chat, and then, you know, we'll give you feedback as well at the end if we can. But the focus is if you put in as good an application as possible, that's as clear as possible, or we have those conversations while you're developing your project, maybe you would go, oh, actually, we've got 2 separate projects here, and we should focus on one and then evidence it, and then come back for more later. Have those conversations with us. We do want to talk to you. We're very busy, but we do want to talk to you. And on that note, I think I'm afraid we're out of time, so I'm going to hand back to Phil. Just to say, we've done some questions. We've got some useful links here. Here you go. I promise they will work. We checked. So when you get your slide back, you'll be able to click on any of those, and that will link to any of those. Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you for listening.